Namaste and welcome to part 2 of Psychoanalysis, Beauty and Annihilation. In this discussion with our subject expert, Dr. Himanshu Vaidya, so far we have seen and understood how the child's primal psychic activities of the pre-psychoanalytic era approach of having the containing-hood, the survival, the pleasure. Beyond that has been the concept of beauty and aesthetic of the child's imagination and innate urge to be part of it. So we were somewhere in the discussion talking about the creative force in the Kleinian concept, how this first creativity of the imagination to be a part of the beauty or to be merging with the beauty or to have a concept of beauty. What is the Kleinian standpoint on this?
Traditionally, in the Kleinian schools, it was believed that the child attacks the bad breast in the split open paranoid schizoid condition. And later on realizes that it is the same breast. And then guilt appears. And as an act of reparation, consequent to that guilt, the child in fantasy tries to recreate that breast which it had attacked and thrown into pieces, or at least damaged, and parts were thrown out. Those cut out parts are put back together to create a good breast in fantasy, and this was believed to be the first act of purposeful creativity in the psychic life. Now, purpose is a word that usually we define by our adult standard, our adult understanding. But there can be purposes of nature which don't seem like purposes to us as adults. If we take into account those purposes, then the phenomena of experience of beauty precedes that experience of guilt and reparation. So in that sense, we have to reconfigure our ideas of purposive creativity when it starts. So before the child can experience that guilt and do reparation, the creativity is seen purposively at work in the experience of beauty. It is seen in creating of those omnipotent projections. It is seen in wonder and fantasies that emerge out of that wonder. It is seen even before some of these experiences in the creation of archetypes. Because it is not a pure mechanical, innately driven process in one sense. There is an element of creativity involved.
Right.
Unconscious, of course. But it is there. And before that, you would have creativity at the service of survival, at the service of system homeostasis, at the service of best possible optimization and pleasure maximization given the situation. So creativity is innately at work right from birth. And we see a major deployment of creativity in the creation of archetypes and then in activation of archetypes in fantasy. We also see creativity in non-archetypal fantasies. And we also see creativity in this experience of beauty. In the fantasy creation fantasy related to the creation of the fantasies related to the good breast. And the creation of the beautiful object of wonder. So obviously we have to prepare and almost make creativity as a psychic function almost innate right from birth. So it does help us to revise our ideas, the traditional ideas of when we see the first fountain of purposive creativity? Yeah.
Life force, it will be projected as beautiful creation, and if it is driven by the death instinct, will it be a ferocious or ugly force? Is there a possibility?
Repeat the question. I lost the first part in the network.
Yeah, while you were talking about the creativity, I was just thinking about if the creativity is governed by a life force, eros, supposed to be projecting it and identifying it with something omnipotently beautiful, while if it is governed by the constitutionally governed by a death instinct, that of a Thanos, will it be projecting it into something very ugly? And I don't know, I'm a bit confused here. Is there a possibility?
Yeah, it is true. That is how it will be, that creativity harnessed by the life force will lead to, in one sense, a positive fantasies. And to the death force, used by the death force, will lead to terrifying fantasies. So, if you bring in the two-force Freudian theory into the Kleinian context, the fantasies related to the bad breast will be the outcome of death drive using creativity, whereas fantasies related to the good breast will be the work of eros using creativity. There's also another element to it, very interesting element. Fragmentation anxiety, in many situations, can be an excess of unregulated life force.
Okay.
Which is very strange, because life force is not supposed to do anything destructive.
Exactly.
But there we realize that if there isn't a minimum of inertia, so death instinct not in the sense of destructive aggression, but in the sense of stabilizing inertia. If that is not there, the life force unrestricted would lead to fragmentation anxiety in situations of this type. If you put it in the language of Ayurveda, if it is too much of Vata and no Kapha, or if you put in terms of the 5 Panch Mahabhut framework, if there is all air and no earth, no inertia of the death instinct and all the effervescence of the life instinct, it will propel the fragmentation anxiety.
Basically, a counterbalancing force is essential to optimize that creativity.
Yeah. So the creativity also needs a ground. It also needs an attenuating factor so that it is purposive and it does not lead to anything which is out of control. There is also a very interesting element coming from what you said. In traditional cultures, we see this strange combination. We talked about beauty and annihilation. We see this both together in the East, especially in India in ancient times. We used to have beautiful women called Vishkanya. There is precisely beauty and annihilation together. That women very beautiful, but if you go near them, they are extremely poisonous because they have been fed poison right from childhood. And they were used as assassins to kill the kings.
Somehow I felt that Vishkanya concept was to do with the annihilation effect of the endless infinite desire.
So it's a fatal seduction. It's a fatal seduction of endless beauty which takes you to annihilation. In fact, it takes you to death in this particular example, not really annihilation, because the two are different. Death, you can have a death without annihilation. If you believe in rebirth, you don't cease to exist even if you die. But even if somebody believes in rebirth and he talks of annihilation, that is ceasing to exist. So in that sense, it's deeper concept than death. So another aspect that you bring up about is in Dash Mahavidya, the tantric concept, as you mentioned a few moments ago, we have the idea of Tripura Sundari, the endless beauty of the three worlds in the form of a goddess. And the goddess is omnipotent. And in the same Dash Mahavidya, we have goddesses which deal with death, pain, torture, and annihilation. So in the course of the worship of the Dash Mahavidya, you experience both beauty and annihilation in its extreme forms.
So the idealization and de-idealization in extreme forms.
And also the
annihilation.
Experience of the endless beauty, the awe, the wonder, the pleasure, the sublime bliss, at times ecstasy. And yet the other side of it, the anxiety, the fragmentation anxiety, the torturous disintegration, the terror of fusion. So I think beauty and annihilation as a mocktail for psychological knowledge, psychological growth, inner journey has been used since ancient times. So the subject is ancient. The exploration in psychoanalysis is deep.
So, Dr. Vedya, you also talked about certain aspects where the psyche of the child or the infant would be feeling inferior to the to giving it to the reality of the piece of fantasy out there. So, does it have bearing on "I'm not good enough" and Oedipus together?
Both of it. Both of it. Because I am not good enough usually is created much before the Oedipus, regardless of which Oedipus you take into account. So Freudian Oedipus is 4 to 5. The Kleinian Oedipus is 2.5. Regardless of which Oedipus, even if you take up the Kleinian date of Oedipus, even then the I am not good enough can happen much before it. It can happen because of object loss. It can happen because of castrating experiences with caregivers. It can happen because of neglect. It can also happen by rejection. It can also happen by unrealistic burdening of the child with things he cannot do. Or it can also happen, one of the factors can also be what we are discussing, the experience of endless beauty. Because this can lead to idealization and de-idealization. Idealization of the other, de-idealization of the self. And if the object of reverence around you is not appreciative, is not a good mirroring object, then it leads to concretization of a very strong feeling of I am not good enough. Because then you are being castrated, neglected, criticized, ignored, not by anybody, but by the omnipotent, who can do no wrong. So you have created an omnipotent person, and if he does not do good mirroring, the mirroring failure is multiplied manifold. So I am not good enough is strengthened very highly. If the mother who is projected on with omnipotence is not a good mirroring object. If it is fortified further by the father, it fortifies even more. So the first early life object loss compounded by a bad mirroring object on whom projection of omnipotence is made, compounded by the father, the paternal omnipotent. If all the three come together, the outcome usually will be dependent personality disorder or histrionic personality disorder. In a few cases, narcissistic personality disorder.
Right.
And of course, all the three personality disorders that try to cope up with it in their own dysfunctional ways, which we call symptoms. And obviously, they pay a huge price in their life for this. And those who are struggling to heal these things know how difficult it is to heal it, how deep the trauma is caused in early life. Another element here is the element of envy. Because this endless beauty outside of us cannot remain without soliciting envy from us. So we live in a worship-envy constellation. The one we worship, the same we are envious of, and the same we want to destroy, and all these feelings are repressed inside. So this early life aesthetic experience can play a very strong part in the pathology development. It can be a very important multiplier, if not the cause of many a pathology. In the Oedipus also is very important. For example, in the Oedipal failure, which it has to be, the I am not good enough will be compounded by the Oedipal failure. And the idealization and de-idealization will be multiplied. Because the Oedipal failure will become a proof of concept of the idealization and de-idealization. So it will be multiplied more. And if I am not good enough is multiplied even more, the dependence, histrionicity, narcissism, whatever mechanisms were created to deal with the crisis, they will be fortified for us. And in most cases, the fixation on the Oedipus will remain unresolved. Because if you go into the Oedipus with idealization and de-idealization springing from many factors, including the perception of beauty, the chances that you successfully resolve the Oedipus are very low. So apart from Oedipal pathology, most people with this difficulty will end up with Oedipal fixation, Oedipal pathology also. So in their therapy, both will come up. The Oedipal pathology, the post-Oedipal traumas, as well as the pre-Oedipal pathology. Obviously, it's going to be a long-term therapy.
So we are talking about the creative aspect of this concept itself, which is very, we see because of that creativity, many different forms of art forms have come into existence. So does it not have a bearing on the intersectional area of psychoanalysis with art?
It does, very strongly. Some areas where the psychoanalytic understanding of response to beauty is central are areas like psychoanalysis of beauty itself, psychoanalysis and aesthetics, psychoanalysis and creativity, psychoanalysis and art. If you try to bring in the East, psychoanalysis of experience of rasa, psychoanalysis of taste. All these areas are areas where our psychoanalytic understanding of beauty becomes central to that area. If you look at Natya Shastra from the East and try to apply psychoanalysis, it will bring up very rich outcomes. Because the perception, the idea of beauty, the idea of rasa and taste, and when you apply psychoanalysis to it, it leads to very rich outcome, which as yet few people have done, but it's worth going on a journey.
So I'm still in awe with the topic. Enriching and esoteric discourse it has been today. Hope you found it intensely interesting too. Thank you, Dr. Vaidya, once again. See you viewers again. Namaste.
Namaste.